The Dallas County Courthouse on Commerce Street had seen its share of drama over the years, but nothing quite prepared the people in courtroom 5B for what was about to unfold on that humid Tuesday morning in June. Before starting the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Now, let's get back to the video. Thomas Green pushed his cleaning cart down the marble hallway, the wheels squeaking slightly as they rolled over the polished floor. He wore his standard navy blue custodian uniform, the name Tom stitched in white thread over the pocket. In his other hand, he carried a worn leather folder, the only thing that seemed out of place. He'd been working as a janitor at the courthouse for 2 years now. Most people didn't notice him. The judges nodded politely when they passed. The lawyers barely looked up from their phones. The clerks knew his name, but only because it was on his shirt. That's exactly how Thomas wanted it. At 7:30 a.m., he parked his cart in the custodian's closet on the 3rd floor, changed out of his work shirt into a simple white dress shirt and tie, and walked toward courtroom 5B. The folder felt heavier than usual in his hands. Today, he wasn't the janitor. Today, he was the defendant. But nobody in that courtroom had any idea who they were really dealing with. The case was simple on the surface. Thomas was being sued by his former landlord, Victor Ashford, for $47,000 in damages to a rental property in Oak Cliff. Ashford claimed Thomas had destroyed the interior, broken appliances, and left the place uninhabitable. Thomas knew it was a lie, every word of it. He had documentation, photos, repair receipts, everything he needed to prove his case. What he didn't have was a lawyer. He'd tried. 3 different attorneys had looked at his case, quoted him fees between $8,000 and $15,000, and when he couldn't pay up front, they'd politely declined. Legal aid was backlogged for months. The pro bono clinic had no availability. So Thomas decided to represent himself. He'd done it before. Many times, actually. Just not in the last 15 years. The courtroom was already filling up when Thomas walked in. He took a seat at the defendant's table, setting his folder down carefully. Across the aisle, Victor Ashford sat with his attorney, a man Thomas recognized immediately, Richard Castellano. Mid-50s, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Thomas made in 3 months. Castellano was a fixture in Dallas civil litigation, known for his aggressive tactics, his win record, and his absolute confidence in every case he took. He was also known for something else, his complete lack of patience for people he considered beneath him. Castellano glanced over at Thomas, then did a double-take when he saw the empty chair beside him. "Excuse me," Castellano called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "Are you waiting for your attorney?" Thomas looked up calmly. "I'm representing myself." Castellano's eyebrows shot up, then he laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound that made several people in the gallery turn to look. "You're joking," Castellano said, standing up and walking toward Thomas's table. "You're actually going to represent yourself in a civil case against me?" Thomas met his eyes steadily. "That's right." Castellano shook his head, smirking. "This is going to be over in 20 minutes. Your Honor." He turned toward the bench, though the judge hadn't entered yet. "I move for summary judgment based on the defendant's clear inability to mount an adequate defense." "The judge isn't here yet," Thomas said quietly. "I know that," Castellano snapped. "I'm just saving everyone time. Look at you. You can't even afford a lawyer. How exactly do you expect to—" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes narrowing. "Wait, don't I know you from somewhere?" Thomas's expression didn't change. "I work here. I'm a custodian." Castellano's mouth fell open. Then he burst out laughing again, louder this time. "Oh, this is perfect," he said, turning to his client. "Victor, did you hear that? The defendant is the janitor. The courthouse janitor is trying to defend himself against a civil suit." Victor Ashford smiled uncomfortably, clearly unsure whether to join in the laughter. Castellano turned back to Thomas, his expression a mix of amusement and pity. "Listen, friend. I admire the effort, I really do, but you're in way over your head here. You're going to get destroyed. Why don't you just settle now? Save yourself the embarrassment." Thomas leaned back in his chair, his hands folded calmly on the table. "I'll take my chances." "Your chances?" Castellano laughed again. "You don't have any chances. Do you even know what a motion in limine is? Do you understand the rules of evidence? Have you ever heard of the Texas Rules of Civil Procedure?" "I have," Thomas said simply. "Reading about them on Google doesn't count," Castellano shot back. "This is a real courtroom. Real law. And you're about to learn a very expensive lesson about why people hire attorneys." The bailiff's voice cut through the room. "All rise. The Honorable Judge Patricia Whitmore, presiding." Judge Patricia Whitmore entered the courtroom with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd been doing this for 30 years. She was in her early 60s, with sharp eyes and an expression that suggested she'd seen every trick in the book. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked down at the case file. "Green versus Ashford," she read aloud. "Civil matter, property damages." She looked up. "Counsel, please state your appearances." Castellano stood smoothly. "Richard Castellano for the plaintiff, Your Honor." Judge Whitmore nodded, then turned to Thomas. "And for the defendant?" Thomas stood. "Thomas Green, appearing pro se, Your Honor." The judge's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. She glanced at Castellano, then back at Thomas. "Mr. Green, you're aware that you have the right to legal representation?" "I am, Your Honor." "And you've chosen to proceed without counsel?" "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Whitmore paused, studying him for a moment. Then she nodded. "Very well. Mr. Castellano, you may proceed with your opening statement." Castellano stood, buttoning his suit jacket with a flourish. He walked toward the jury box, though this was a bench trial. Force of habit made him address the empty seats anyway, before turning to the judge. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of property destruction and breach of contract. The evidence will show that the defendant, Mr. Green, leased a property from my client for 18 months, and during that time, caused over $47,000 in damages." He pulled out a stack of photos. "These images show the condition of the property after Mr. Green vacated. Broken cabinets, damaged flooring, appliances destroyed, walls with holes punched through them." Thomas watched silently, his expression neutral. Castellano continued, his voice rising with practiced indignation. "My client, Mr. Ashford, is a working man who invested his savings into this rental property, and the defendant destroyed it. The damages are clear. The liability is clear. And frankly, Your Honor, I don't anticipate this taking very long." He glanced at Thomas with barely concealed contempt, especially given the defendant's limited legal expertise. A few people in the gallery chuckled. Judge Whitmore's expression hardened slightly. "Mr. Castellano, please address the court, not the defendant." "Of course, Your Honor." "My apologies," but his smirk remained. Judge Whitmore turned to Thomas. "Mr. Green, your opening statement?" Thomas stood slowly. He didn't walk toward the judge. He didn't gesture dramatically. He simply stood at his table, hands resting lightly on the surface, and spoke in a clear, measured tone. "Your Honor, the plaintiff's case is built on fabricated evidence and false testimony. I will demonstrate that the damages Mr. Ashford claims I caused actually existed before I ever moved into the property. I will show that Mr. Ashford has a pattern of suing former tenants for pre-existing damage, collecting settlements from people who can't afford to fight back." Castellano scoffed audibly. Thomas continued, unfazed. "I have photographs, time-stamped and geotagged, showing the condition of the property on the day I moved in. I have repair receipts for fixes I made at my own expense. I have testimony from neighbors and previous tenants, and I have building inspection records that will prove Mr. Ashford knew about these issues long before I arrived." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. Thomas sat down. Castellano was already on his feet. "Your Honor, this is absurd. The defendant is making wild accusations without any foundation. He's clearly desperate and grasping at straws." "You'll have your opportunity to respond, Mr. Castellano," Judge Whitmore said coolly. "Call your first witness." Castellano called Victor Ashford to the stand. Ashford was a heavy-set man in his late 50s, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. He looked nervous as he took the oath. Castellano walked him through the testimony like a well-rehearsed script. Ashford described the property as being in perfect condition before Thomas moved in. He claimed he'd spent thousands repairing the damage after Thomas left. When Castellano finished, he turned to Thomas with an almost pitying expression. "Your witness, Mr. Green." Though I can't imagine you have any relevant questions. Thomas stood slowly, picking up a single sheet of paper from his folder. Thomas walked toward the witness stand, his movements calm and deliberate. He didn't rush. He didn't grandstand. He simply approached with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "Mr. Ashford," Thomas began, his voice even, "you testified that the property was in perfect condition before I moved in. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's right," Ashford replied, though his eyes darted nervously toward Castellano. "And you have documentation of that condition? Photos, inspection reports, anything like that?" Ashford hesitated. "Well, I know what condition it was in. I didn't think I needed. So no documentation," Thomas said. It wasn't a question. Castellano stood. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is being badgered." "Overruled," Judge Whitmore said, leaning forward with interest. "The defendant is entitled to cross-examine." "Continue, Mr. Green." Thomas turned back to Ashford. "Mr. Ashford, how many tenants have you sued in the past 5 years?" Ashford's face went red. I don't know exactly. Would you say more than 5? Maybe. More than 10? Possibly." Thomas walked back to his table and pulled out a document. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence a compilation of civil suits filed by Victor Ashford over the past 5 years. It shows 14 separate lawsuits against former tenants, all claiming property damage, all settled out of court." Castellano shot to his feet. "Objection. Relevance." "It's relevant to establish a pattern of behavior, Your Honor," Thomas said calmly. Judge Whitmore took the document, scanning it quickly. Her expression tightened. "I'll allow it." "Mr. Ashford, answer the question." Ashford shifted in his seat. "Those were legitimate claims." "Were they?" Thomas asked, "because I've spoken to 3 of those former tenants. They all tell the same story. You showed them photos of damage that existed before they moved in, threatened to sue, and they settled because they couldn't afford a lawyer." "That's a lie," Ashford burst out. "Is it?" Thomas pulled out another document. "This is a building inspection report from the city of Dallas, dated 3 months before I moved into your property. It lists multiple violations: damaged flooring in the kitchen, broken cabinet doors, non-functional appliances, and holes in the drywall of the master bedroom." The courtroom went silent. Castellano's face had gone pale. "Your Honor, I was not provided with this document during discovery." "That's because Mr. Ashford never disclosed it," Thomas said, "but it's a public record, available to anyone who knows where to look." Judge Whitmore's expression was thunderous. "Mr. Ashford, did you provide this inspection report to your attorney?" Ashford stammered. I forgot about it." "You forgot," Thomas repeated. "Just like you forgot to mention that you received a citation from the city requiring you to make those repairs before renting the property again. A citation you ignored." Castellano looked like he wanted to disappear. "Your Honor, if I may." "You may not," Judge Whitmore snapped. She turned to Thomas. "Mr. Green, do you have additional evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor." Thomas returned to his table and pulled out a thick folder. "I have photographs I took the day I moved in, showing all the damage listed in the inspection report. I have receipts for repairs I made personally, totaling over $3,000. And I have statements from 2 previous tenants willing to testify that Mr. Ashford showed them the exact same photos he's presenting today, photos of damage that existed before any of us lived there." The judge took the folder, flipping through it slowly. The courtroom was utterly silent. Finally, she looked up at Castellano. "Counselor, do you have anything to say?" Castellano's mouth opened and closed, For the first time in his career, he appeared to be speechless. Judge Whitmore set the folder down with a sharp slap. This case is going to take a very different turn. Judge Whitmore looked at Ashford, who was sweating visibly on the witness stand. Mr. Ashford, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I suggest you answer truthfully. Did you knowingly present false evidence to this court? Ashford's voice was barely a whisper. I just wanted to be compensated for... Answer the question, yes or no. Ashford's shoulders slumped. Yes. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Castellano sank into his chair, his face ashen. Judge Whitmore's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Order! She waited until the room quieted, then turned to Thomas. Mr. Green, in light of this testimony, do you wish to pursue a counterclaim? Thomas stood. Yes, Your Honor, I'm filing for malicious prosecution, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I'm also requesting that the court award sanctions against both Mr. Ashford and his counsel for bringing a frivolous lawsuit. Castellano finally found his voice, standing shakily. Your Honor, I was not aware of my client's misrepresentations. I relied on the information he provided. That's your job, Mr. Castellano, Judge Whitmore said coldly, to verify the information your clients provide, to conduct due diligence, to ensure that you're not wasting this court's time with fraudulent claims. She looked back at Thomas. Mr. Green, you've presented compelling evidence. But I have to ask, you've demonstrated a level of legal knowledge and courtroom skill that's highly unusual for a pro se litigant. Where did you acquire this expertise? Thomas hesitated. This was the moment he'd been dreading. I attended law school, Your Honor. The judge's eyebrows rose. Which school? Harvard Law School, class of 2009. The courtroom exploded. People gasped. Castellano's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Even the bailiff looked stunned. Judge Whitmore held up her hand for silence. When the room finally quieted, she said, You're a Harvard Law graduate working as a courthouse janitor? Yes, Your Honor. And you're licensed to practice? Thomas shook his head slowly. I was. I let my license lapse in 2015. I haven't practiced in 10 years. The judge studied him for a long moment. Why? Thomas's jaw tightened. For a moment, it looked like he wouldn't answer. Then, quietly, he said, Personal reasons, Your Honor. It's not relevant to this case. Judge Whitmore nodded slowly. I see. She turned to Castellano, whose face had gone from pale to red. Mr. Castellano, do you have anything to add? Castellano stood, but his usual swagger was gone. Your Honor, I apologize to the court. I should have been more thorough. You should have treated the defendant with respect, Judge Whitmore interrupted. Regardless of whether he had a law degree or not, regardless of whether he was a janitor or a CEO, you made assumptions, you mocked him, and you brought a fraudulent case before this court because you didn't bother to do your job. Castellano had no response. Judge Whitmore turned back to Thomas. Mr. Green, I'm dismissing the plaintiff's case with prejudice. I'm awarding you damages in the amount of $15,000 for your time, your repairs, and the emotional distress this fraudulent lawsuit has caused. I'm also sanctioning Mr. Ashford and Mr. Castellano jointly in the amount of $10,000 for bringing a frivolous claim. She paused, then added, And Mr. Green? You argued this case better than half the attorneys I see in this courtroom. Whatever your reasons for leaving the law, I hope you reconsider. We need more lawyers like you. Thomas nodded, his expression unreadable. But inside, something shifted. The courtroom cleared slowly. People whispered as they filed out, stealing glances at Thomas. Castellano packed his briefcase in silence, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Victor Ashford had already left, his face burning with shame. Thomas gathered his folder and stood to leave. But Judge Whitmore's voice stopped him. Mr. Green, a word in chambers. Thomas followed her through the door behind the bench. Her chambers were lined with law books, framed degrees, and photos of her family. She gestured to a chair. "Sit, please." Thomas sat. The judge settled into her chair, studying him with sharp, intelligent eyes. "I've been on the bench for 32 years, she said. "I've seen thousands of attorneys come through that courtroom. You just outperformed 90% of them. And you did it without a license, without practicing for a decade, and while working as a janitor." She leaned forward. "So I'm going to ask you again, and this time I'd like a real answer. Why did you walk away from the law?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, he began to speak. "I was a public defender in Boston, right out of law school. I thought I was going to change the world, defend the innocent, fight the system, make a difference." He paused, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I had a client, Michael Porter, 22 years old, black kid from Dorchester. He was accused of armed robbery. But I knew he didn't do it. I had evidence, alibi witnesses, surveillance footage that didn't match the timeline, everything. But the prosecutor offered a plea deal, 5 years instead of 20. His voice grew quieter. "Michael wanted to fight. He trusted me. So we went to trial, and I lost. The jury convicted him in less than 3 hours. He got 25 years. Judge Whitmore's expression softened. 2 years later, Thomas continued, they found the real guy. DNA evidence, confession, everything. Michael was exonerated, but by then, he'd already served 2 years in prison. 2 years of his life, gone. Because I wasn't good enough. Because I failed him." He looked up at the judge. "I couldn't do it anymore. Every time I stood in a courtroom, I saw his face. I heard his voice when the verdict came down. So I quit. Let my license lapse. Moved to Dallas. Got a job where I didn't have to think about any of it." The judge was silent for a moment. Then she said, Mr. Green, what happened to Michael Porter was a tragedy. But it wasn't your fault. You did everything you could with the evidence you had. That's all any lawyer can do." "It wasn't enough," Thomas said simply. "It never is," Judge Whitmore replied. "That's the curse of this profession. We can't save everyone. We can't win every case. But that doesn't mean we stop trying." She stood, walking to her bookshelf. She pulled down a card and wrote something on it, then handed it to Thomas. "This is the number for the Texas Bar Reinstatement Office. You're going to need to take some courses, pass the ethics exam, but your Harvard degree still counts. You can get your license back." Thomas took the card but didn't look at it. "Why would I want to?" "Because," Judge Whitmore said, "you just took down one of the most arrogant attorneys in Dallas without breaking a sweat. Because you fight for what's right, even when it's hard. And because people like Victor Ashford prey on people who don't have lawyers like you." She walked to the door, opening it. "Think about it, Mr. Green. The law needs people who actually give a damn. And from what I saw today, you still do." Thomas stood, nodding slowly. "Thank you, Your Honor." As he walked out of the courthouse, the card felt heavy in his pocket. 6 months later, Thomas Green walked into the same courthouse. But this time, he wasn't pushing a cleaning cart. He wore a simple but well-tailored suit. His briefcase was worn but professional, and pinned to his jacket pocket was a freshly printed bar card, Thomas Green, attorney at law. He'd passed the reinstatement exam on the first try, scored in the top 5%. The Texas bar had welcomed him back without hesitation. Now, he was here for his first case as a reinstated attorney. The case was small, a tenant facing eviction over disputed damages. The landlord was represented by a large firm. The tenant couldn't afford a lawyer. So Thomas took the case pro bono. As he walked into courtroom 5B, he saw Judge Whitmore on the bench. She caught his eye and gave the smallest of nods, a gesture of approval. Thomas set his briefcase down at the defense table. Across the aisle, the opposing attorney looked at him with the same dismissive expression Castellano had worn 6 months ago. But Thomas didn't need to prove anything to him. He just needed to win. And as the bailiff called the court to order, Thomas Green opened his briefcase, pulled out his notes, and prepared to do exactly that. Because some people are meant to be lawyers, and some lawyers are meant to fight for those who have no one else. Thomas Green had found his way back. 1 year after that first case, Thomas Green opened his own practice, Green and Associates, Tenant Rights Law. He worked out of a small office in Oak Cliff, the same neighborhood where Victor Ashford had tried to scam him. His clients were people who couldn't afford the big firms, people facing evictions, fighting slumlords, battling fraudulent damage claims. He won most of his cases. Not all, but most. And the ones he lost? He learned from them. He got better. He kept fighting. Richard Castellano, meanwhile, had quietly retired. The sanctions from Judge Whitmore had been the beginning of the end. Other judges started scrutinizing his cases more carefully. Clients started asking questions. Within a year, he closed his practice. Victor Ashford was under investigation by the district attorney for fraud. 3 of his former tenants had filed criminal complaints. And Thomas? He still thought about Michael Porter sometimes. He always would. But now, when he stood in a courtroom, he didn't just see Michael's face. He saw the faces of everyone he'd helped since, everyone he'd fought for, everyone who'd walked into his office with nothing but hope and walked out with justice. Because that's what real lawyers do. They don't give up when it's hard. They don't walk away when they lose. They get back up. They learn. They fight harder. And sometimes, the janitor cleaning the courthouse floors is the best lawyer in the building. He just needed to remember it. Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.